Welcome to this episode of Canway Youth's Decode video series. Canway Youth is a nonprofit organization focusing on positive youth development, and in the Decode videos, we try to translate leading-edge science, technology, and deep insights into actionable knowledge for a young audience. I'm Mihlaan Selvaretnam, Canway Youth's Vice President for Marketing. We are very privileged today to have with us Dr. Jamie Zeitzer, who's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, where he's also the co-director of the Center for Sleep and Circadian Sciences and one of the world's leading experts on sleep medicine. Professor Zeitzer conducted post-doctoral work at UCLA and Stanford and received his PhD at Harvard University in Neurobiology, following an AV at Vassar College in biology. He is a renowned leader in fields ranging from sleep impacts on health to human performance optimization. Dr. Zeitzer is also an entrepreneur, and the IP from his research is behind LumosTech, a startup whose sleep mask can reset jet lag and contribute to more restful sleep. Today I'll be asking him about leading-edge science and applications relating to personal health, and key takeaways for teen young adults. More specifically, what does our younger generation need to know about the amazing impact of sleep on health and performance? And what steps should we take now to maximize our present and future health? Professor Zeitzer, thank you for taking the time to be with us here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Professor Zeitzer, even though we spend a third or more of our lives asleep, or at least we should, the importance of sleep is not generally understood. Before we jump to actionable recommendations for young people, can you give an overview of how sleep is so fundamental to well-being, ranging from physical health, academic and athletic performance to mental health?
Sure. I mean, it's a great question. Sleep is one of these things where, in and of itself, we have very little idea of why exactly we sleep. But it does seem to impact everything. And it's really not a question of if it impacts something, it's a question of how much it impacts it. So as you mentioned, it can impact things like how your immune system works. So how likely you're going to get a cold, athletic performance, how well you're going to do, academic performance. It's going to impact how happy you are. It's going to impact how you interact with friends. It really can impact every aspect of our physiology and behavior. And it's just a question of how much do we mess with this when we don't get enough sleep? How much decrement is there? How much are we willing to take? So, if you're not getting enough sleep and instead of getting a 97 on a test, you get a 95, that might be okay. But if you get even less sleep, and instead of getting a 95, now you get a 70, well, then that becomes a problem. And so that's really, understanding all these impacts.
Do you think there's a cutoff to when sleep becomes detrimental and when it doesn't?
I think so. I mean, we don't look at sleep as really an all or none phenomenon. Like if you get enough sleep, it's perfect, and if you don't, you get nothing. That there's some gradation. And this is one of the things that we're really trying to learn in the field right now is how much sleep do you actually need to get these? And so if I were to say, if you only got 7 hours of sleep, that might get you 90%. But if you got 6 hours of sleep, that'd be 50%. That would be pretty good motivation to go from 6 to 7 hours. Mm-hmm. But that's something we just don't know yet.
Okay, so you can't give an exact percentage, I guess. It's more of an estimate.
No, I wish we knew, because to me that to me is one of the most important things going forward in public health is to really understand, where these cutoffs are and how much, so if you get like one bad night of sleep, or 2 or 3, how much does it take to recover? How many bad nights how many bad nights in a row are really bad for you, and kind of what that cumulative effect is on things that actually matter.
And kind of back to academic and athletics. I'm an athlete myself. Would you say sleep has more effect on one of the two, or is it about equal?
It depends. It depends on really what you're looking at. So when we've looked at sleep in athletes, I have to say, if you're an elite athlete, it matters. If you're me, it's been a long time since I've been that much of an athlete. And so it's not going to have as big an impact on me. But if you're talking about someone who's, gonna run 100, and it's gonna take them, 10.8 seconds, and then they get a good night's sleep, and they can do it in 10.5 seconds. That's a tiny difference. I mean, that's 3/100ths of 0.3 second difference. That could be the difference between getting a good night's sleep and a bad night's sleep, and that might be the difference between coming in first and coming in last. And so again, it's a very small difference for a lot of these physical things when you're talking about having a good night of sleep or a not great night of sleep. Now, when you're looking at it, not getting any sleep at all, that's quite detrimental. And same thing with academics. It's not like if you don't sleep, you're not going to be able to remember anything or perform in a test, but you're definitely not going to do as well. And so for a lot of A lot of high school students, a lot of college students, it always comes up, well, near the end of the semester, should I pull an all-nighter or should I sleep? And well, if you know the material okay, it's better to actually sleep, because not only will you then remember the things. One of the things that sleep does is it helps move the memories that you made during the day and integrate it into what you know. And so it's going to be much easier to kind of make these loose connections on tests if you get a good night's sleep. And then also, when you're taking the test the next day, you're actually going to be much more alert than if you're trying to, if you're drinking cups of coffee, trying to stay awake during a test. That's going to be more problematic.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind for my next test. All right.
Would have been good 4 years ago, maybe.
Right. All right. Thanks to researchers like you, California recently mandated later start times for school. Evidently, later school start times improve academic performance, reduce anxiety and depression, and can even help reduce suicide incidents among teens. As I understand it, the California legislation was a small step, and if we followed current scientific understandings, high schoolers should start their day as late as 10 a.m. Is that right, and what's your advice to school districts and legislators, and perhaps most of all to parents who seem to equate sleeping with laziness?
Yes, it's a great question. I mean, you could start high school as late as 11 o'clock and you're still not going to get enough sleep for some kids. So, right now it's at a compromised position. I have to say it's complicated because, the later you start school, the later it ends. And that causes some problems for things like after school athletics. If you're using the fields and it's in the wintertime, well, if your fields don't have lights, you can't have a sport then because it's going to get dark by the time you be let out of school. In terms of the kids in school and getting enough sleep, it's hard to go to sleep earlier. I mean, so, one of the things that a lot of parents and kids, I think, believe is that this is all due to kind of social pressures. Like kids, you're 17, you stay up late because you can. There's a lot of stuff. You can be on your Insta account, you can be playing video games, you can be doing homework. There's a lot of stuff you can be doing, and that's all true. But there's also a biological change that occurs. And that what happens is that kids, when they're entering into puberty, their circadian clock, which kind of dictates the timing of sleep, this shifts to a later time. And so this is getting later and later as kids get older. And then that's reinforced by all of these social aspects. A colleague of mine, Mary Carskadden, has coined this term, the perfect storm. And that's really kind of what's happening. So you have all of these things which are basically creating this issue where students want to stay up later, and biologically they want to stay up later, and socially they want to stay up later. And so it's really hard not to stay up later.
Okay. Besides these social aspects, do you think that, or is there any evidence that proves that sleep has a direct correlation to, let's say, attention span? See, the days are getting longer, but if you were to cut the days shorter, would this, I guess, double up, or would this be a double positive for not only do people get to start school later, but their attention is also more focused on what they should be learning?
Absolutely. You have, if you're getting good sleep, you can definitely be more attent in class. Things that are more difficult, you can pay attention to. I mean, look, no matter how tired you are, you can always pay attention for a few minutes. But try that for a full day of classes, especially full day of classes where not everything is always the most exciting. It's going to be much harder to do that. And so the point is that, the kids that are falling asleep in class, it's not because they're bored. It's because they're tired and they just haven't had enough sleep. And so getting enough sleep will enable them to stay awake, stay focused, stay attent, learn things. And so, yeah, you have, again, this double positive where not only are you getting the benefits of sleep in terms of its ability to move information from kind of, spread out information, random bits of information, kind of move that into knowledge, but then you also then the next day can be much more alert and attempt to obtain new information.
Okay. Can you comment on what young people should be looking at concerning sleep? For example, do you advocate for wearables like watches which monitor sleep and problems like apnea? Or can a lot be done just by behavior modifications alone?
So I'm not a huge fan of the wearables because I think that while in people who are good sleepers, they're actually reasonably accurate, and people who are bad sleepers, they're not accurate at all. And so that becomes a problem. And frankly, most people don't know how much sleep they're getting. Apnea is different. Apnea is something that, if you've got a device, if you have apnea, this is where you have repeated periods during sleep where you're basically choking yourself awake. And this can happen anytime, anywhere between, say, a couple hundred, several hundred times per night, and you don't remember it. So you might just wake up in the morning, you'll have no memory that you woke up 400 times last night because you were choking and couldn't breathe. And so having a device that detects that, I think that's great. But a device that generally just checks how much sleep you're getting, I don't think that's particularly useful. I do think that you should, be aware of it, be aware of how it impacts you. I mean, we generally say things like, oh, students that are in high school should be getting between 8 and 10 hours of sleep per night, depending. Well, like everything else in biology, it's a bell curve. And some kids need less, some kids need more. And so you should really be aware of how it's impacting you. So frankly, if you're sleeping for 9 hours and you wake up and you still feel tired, you actually might need more, even though it's 9 hours. If you're sleeping 7 hours, you wake up and you feel fine, and then on the weekend you don't sleep in, you're still sleeping 7 hours, you might be one of the lucky people who only need 7 hours. So it's really important to kind of pay attention to that, and again, paying attention on the weekends and when you have opportunity to sleep in. If you get extra sleep during those times, then whatever you're getting during the week is probably not enough.
Okay. I kind of want to go back to what you said about being a good sleeper or a bad sleeper. What quantifies that? Is it the number of hours you get, or is it the quality of sleep you get, or
Yeah,
how do you classify that?
that's a great question. I mean, so we used to kind of classify sleep into like good and bad, kind of a dichotomy, and now we're stepping back and saying, that's not real. It's really, there's a continuum, and a colleague of mine, Dan Bicey, has come up with this thing called "Are You Sated?" He's good with these acronyms, and this is one of the good acronyms to remember. And it looks at different aspects of sleep. So it's looking at how regular your sleep is. So basically, are you going to sleep at the same time every night? So that's important. That's the RU of it. And satisfaction. So when you wake up in the morning, you feel like you had a good night. And then alertness, how alert you are during the day. The timing. So are you going to sleep early enough? And then the E and the D. Wow, I got to remember these. It's duration is the D. So how long you slept for. And E is efficiency. So are you basically spending a lot of time lounging around in bed, or are you waking up a lot? So these are the kind of components. And so, again, most teens don't have much of a problem getting efficient sleep. Usually they fall asleep, and then it's just they don't get enough. Their duration isn't long enough. Sometimes, even if they've had good duration, they don't feel good. They don't feel alert during the day, and that's problematic. A lot of teens have a lot of variability when they fall asleep, and again, that can be problematic. So it's all of these aspects really kind of go into it, into determining what we would consider to be good sleep. And again, there are some people who really do. They've got great sleep. It's like perfect sleep all the time. And then for everyone else, it's imperfect. And the question is that how imperfect is it, and when does it start to become a problem?
Okay. You were just talking about, like, for example, lounging around in bed, and I was wondering about, because this is something I do myself. Obviously, we're supposed to turn our phones off an hour before bed, right?
Yep.
But is there any way to maximize, even if you do all these things, I often find myself still tossing and turning in bed at night.
Yep.
Is there any, I guess, shortcuts to go to sleep early? Because I know I found myself, and a lot of other people have probably watching, have found themselves looking up how to fall asleep in 30 seconds, and you get these military strategies to relax your body and whatnot. Are those effective, would you say? And
So it depends, all right? And I hate to say that. I wish there was a simple answer for it. So one of the things that's happening is that if you go to sleep, so the time in your sleep is very much dictated by two different processes. One is just how long you've been awake, and the other is the circadian clock. The circadian clock is a really strong signal to keep you awake in the hours before you normally go to sleep. So if you normally go to sleep at 2 in the morning, and then you're like, I need to get some extra sleep, I want to go to sleep at midnight, that's going to be really hard because the circadian system is stopping you from doing that. And no amount of breathing is really going to help. Now, some people can go to sleep then because they're just so sleep deprived. And so one of the key things is that when trying to go to sleep, if you're having difficulties, is finding the technique that works for you in terms of relaxing. So as you mentioned, the military, techniques, this is basically just a sequence of relaxation techniques. But if they don't work for you, then they don't work. But if, for example, if listening to music works for you, that's great. But if listening to music makes you get an ear worm or sing along, then that's terrible. if doing yoga works for you, great. But if yoga is just not for you, well, then that's terrible. Reading a book is great, then do that. So basically, it's really finding what relaxes your brain. Because one of the things that ends up happening so often is that you're tired, but your brain hasn't stopped working. You've been working all day, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm going to go to sleep. And kind of just stopping suddenly and trying to go to sleep, that becomes very difficult. And then many times the worst thing happens, which is then you start to worry that you're not getting enough sleep. And then you start to develop insomnia. And so when it becomes problematic.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of transitioning over to my next question for you about mainly about like medication and non-prescription supplements.
Yep.
So a lot of young adults see a lot of ads and social channel discussions of non-prescription supplements to improve sleep quality, like magnesium or apigenin and L-theanine. And on the other side of the coin, there are warnings about caffeine and all the energy drinks that are probably disrupting your sleep. Are there any that make enough sense for the general population, like to take, or are they just like fads that you would warn against?
So with any kind of supplement, so we'll circle back to caffeine because that's a little different. But any kind of supplement that's supposed to help sleep, the key thing is making sure that there are no negatives to it. So making sure that it's produced well. A lot of these, because they're present in naturally occurring substances, they're not regulated by the FDA, and so that becomes problematic because then you don't know what you're getting. Are you getting 300 milligrams, or are you getting 1,000 milligrams, or none? You don't know because it's not regulated. So getting it from a reliable source is important. Many of these things, I have to say, have a funny. It's kind of a funny thing where many things, when they're tried in double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, they don't work very well. In open-label trials, they do. And so one of the things that's happening is that people taking, they'll have their tea, right? And, oh, it's got a lot of chamomile. That's going to help me sleep. If you think it's going to help you sleep, it's actually going to help you sleep. And it's all about kind of getting out of your own way. So these kinds of supplements, if you think they're going to work, that's a very powerful tool to help you go to sleep. Because then you're not worried about falling asleep. Then you just kind of allow it to happen. Now, in terms of caffeine, you mentioned, again, caffeine, it's a lot of people have caffeine. A lot of people have a lot of caffeine. 300 milligrams, 500 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, lots and lots of caffeine. There was a poor woman in college who just died having had too much caffeine. She had a energy drink with lemonade. So it can be problematic. But not even invoking dying from caffeine, you can have caffeine in the morning, and in some people, that caffeine's gone by the time lunchtime rolls around. In other people, the caffeine, you still have half a cup rolling around your brain at night. And that has to do with the half-life, or the amount of time it takes for half of it to disappear. And that in healthy individuals ranges anywhere from 2 to 12 hours. So if you have a 2-hour half-life of caffeine and you have a Red Bull first thing in the morning, by the time lunch comes around, that caffeine's all gone. You have a 12-hour half-life, it's like having half a can of Red Bull right before you fall asleep. And so being aware of how caffeine might impact you individually is super important, because you definitely, even if you're drinking in the morning, it can have an impact on your sleep at night. We had done a study many years ago in Stanford College students, and we found that they were so sleep deprived it didn't matter how much caffeine they had. They were having energy drinks and then falling asleep like that right afterwards because they were running on so little sleep. It didn't matter that they had an energy drink, stayed up an extra hour, and then they just crashed. So it doesn't prevent you from sleeping, but it definitely makes it much more difficult.
Okay, so I guess stay away from the 5-hour energies and know your own body.
If you can, yeah, it's definitely better not to have to go down that road.
Okay, what would you say the main negatives are? I mean, of course, we know the worst case, like you just said, that a lady that died on campus, but for the general person having a Red Bull or coffee in the morning, or even having one in the morning, one in the afternoon to get through the day and study, what would you say, like some common negative effects?
So the two big negative ones, besides the direct effect on sleep, that it can disrupt sleep, the other is that it's kind of giving you the illusion that you're getting enough sleep. And so you're able to caffeinate yourself into wakefulness over a period of time, the whole day. You're caffeinated into wakefulness. And so you don't feel tired. but your brain isn't getting enough sleep. And so it's not replacing sleep. So all these positives that are happening during sleep aren't happening. And you are basically just medicating away the most obvious signal, which is that you feel tired. Oh, now you don't feel tired anymore because you've had all this caffeine. And so, to me, that's really one of the big problems of having so much caffeine, is that we avoid having to realize how little sleep we're actually getting. And again, we're not getting then all the positives out of that.
Okay, makes sense. Are you personally a coffee drinker, or do you stay away from caffeine completely?
I only drink coffee at conferences because it's hard for me to stay awake at a conference otherwise. But otherwise, yeah, I avoid it. But that's because it definitely messes with my sleep. So if I drink caffeine in the morning, and it also, even though it's not physiologically bad, it also makes my hands jittery.
Okay. So it's more of like you have low tolerance and you just don't want to keep it that way, right?
Well, I've got a long half-life, and so I prefer not to mess up my sleep any more than it is.
Makes sense. All right, what about on the diagnostic front? Are there any easy ways for people to rate their own sleep habits and figure out what they need and if they even need it? And on the upside of, I understand that you're part of the Woodside Human Performance Alliance at Stanford. And can you also speak about sleep in relation to athletes and others wanting to reach the highest performance level?
Sure. So, in terms of monitoring your own sleep, again, people can do it with devices, but many times when people do it with devices, they get really concerned. And that concern can then lead into insomnia. And I worry more about that. It's kind of just being aware of how you're feeling during the day, if you're getting enough sleep, when you're waking up, how do you feel? Self-monitoring like that is usually sufficient. Again, the rule of thumb is that if you're sleeping in when you have an opportunity, you're probably not getting enough. In terms of athletes, absolutely. Many of the athletes at Stanford University that we've looked at, we've been very disappointed because they have really good sleep. So we really can't help them. And I was so excited to help them out, but they've already gotten the message. And we've got a fantastic athletic program at Stanford, and they pay attention. They're sleeping great. They have regular sleep. They sleep enough hours, and I really think that it helps their overall performance and things. And when you have students who aren't, again, it's really easy to detect in individual sports. In team sports, it's a little harder. But when you look at certain metrics, you see that these things are definitely related to sleep. You look at free throw percentage in basketball. Again, that's going to be fairly independent of who you're playing, but you see that's going to be affected by sleep. So again, for athletes, again, this is something which is, they've gotten the message. In fact, we have some athletes who get worried because they don't think they're getting enough sleep. They say, "Oh, I'm only getting 9 hours of sleep a night," and they're worried that's not enough. Again, there are plenty of people that 9 hours is way more than they actually need. Again, the biggest, and this is the trick with sleep, is to be aware of it, but not worry too much about it. Because if you worry too much about it, it just makes it worse.
Okay. What do you think about these short power naps, I guess? I mean, I'm a wrestler, so in between my matches, I'll take a quick little 30-minute power nap. I'll wake up feeling fine. Do you think, sometimes I wake up feeling fine, sometimes I'm a little bit groggy or whatever. What do you think of these short, even in general, not when it comes to sports, these short little power naps in between, are they beneficial? Is it really just an illusion? If it is placebo, should I just keep going with it? What do you think?
They absolutely can be beneficial. Again, especially if you're not getting enough sleep at night, that extra sleep in there can be, very restorative. The brain changes during sleep. There are a lot of things that are going on during sleep that just aren't possible when you're awake. With muscle recovery, much of it is just that you're in a relaxed state, that you're not worried. But in terms of energy and localization, one of the things that's happening during sleep is you're kind of rearranging where energy is in the body, and you're moving a lot of it into storage. And so it's quite possible when you do one of these power naps and you wake up, you've got actually more energy, available for you. So if it's working, that's great. Some people actually will double up on caffeine and napping, because it takes around 45 minutes for caffeine to peak in your blood. And so what they'll do is they'll have energy drink, cup of coffee, something like that. Then they'll take a power nap. They wake up 45 minutes later. They get the caffeine boost plus the nap boost.
Oh.
And so they get the double whammy.
There you go. Interesting. Maybe I'll have to try that once. Now, Shifting gears onto the device front, your research is behind LumosTech, a remarkable startup that sells a mask that can help regulate sleep cycles via specific light therapy bursts during sleep. One application is to manage jet lag. Is it conceivable though that could also help teens that get their sleep patterns scrambled and need to come back to healthier sleep hours?
Absolutely. It's something that we've tested in the past. We actually ran a study using this. So this is basically the mask. What it does is it provides light flashes, very brief light flashes while you're sleeping. So you wear the mask when you're asleep. It can activate circuits in the brain that control the circadian clock. And so basically, depending on when you give it at night, it can make the clock go earlier or later. And in this case, we're basically making the clock go earlier. So teens are going to get tired earlier. And this is basically biologically enabling them to get tired earlier. Because as I mentioned before, is that you've got this big burst of alertness that happens right before you normally fall asleep, making it more difficult to fall asleep early. So this is allowing them to fall asleep. And the key there is adding in this behavioral component to convince teens to actually try this. And when we've done this in the past, we've actually gotten 45 minutes of extra sleep per night in the teens, which we're very excited about, especially coupled with the later school start times. We think we're getting closer to having a normal amount of sleep in teens. And now we're testing it long term. We're saying, that was over a 5-week span. So now we're looking at a full year. So do teens actually go to sleep an hour earlier for a full year? Or after a couple of months, they're like, forget it, I'm going back to sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. I got too much stuff to do.
So do you think how's the research looking? Is it looking like it's going to be good to go? It's going to work long term, or can you not tell yet?
We don't know. This is something we're in the midst of it right now, and so we can't tell. In our preliminary studies, it all looked pretty good. But we're excited to see what it does, and also we're excited to see if it really impacts other aspects that are related to sleep. So, for example, are people doing better cognitively? Do they have better academic performance? Are they doing better emotionally? As you pointed out, there's this big connection between sleep and depression and suicidality. Are kids feeling better, when they're getting more sleep? Is this actually able to positively contribute to their mood? When we did this last time, about 2/3 of the kids we studied had really significant levels of depression. And it's pretty common in this area to see that. And so the question is, well, if we improve sleep, can we actually reduce that? Which I think would be pretty important.
All right. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that research. Everybody watching should too. Professor Zeitzer, thanks again for your time and all the great insights. I really appreciate you meeting with me today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see that it
all the way through. Perfect.